Hello and welcome to Forbidden Talk, the social program covering taboo topics in the Middle East. Today we'll be focusing on the rise of polygamy in the UK. Some people are vehemently opposed to polygamy, arguing that it is an outdated concept and a violation of women's rights, incompatible with modern-day transgressive thought, while others assert that it's more a reflection of Muslim libertarianism, offering a practical solution to women who want to focus on their careers and don't have time to be full-time wives, whilst maintaining loyalty to their faith. With polygamous marriages on the rise in the UK, albeit illegally, is it time we seriously considered legalising this practice? Should we intervene for the sake of women's rights? Or do we agree to disagree and let each culture have their own traditions? We'll be exploring these questions and more, but firstly I'd like to introduce my studio guest, Anna Khan, Sharia law expert and family law solicitor at Duncan Lewis Solicitors. Thanks for being with us. But before we move on, let's pause to watch this brief report on the issue.
Polygamy, the practice of a person being married to more than one spouse at the same time. A concept, though alien to many, is a normal lifestyle for others. Though polygamy has commonly been associated with Islam, polygamy was an accepted practice in Jewish law and among early Hebrews, including several biblical figures such as Abraham, David, and Solomon. Even though it is illegal to perform marriages of this kind in the UK, it is estimated that as many as 20,000 polygamous marriages exist in the country. If a person gets married in the UK and is already legally married, they would be considered as committing bigamy and could face imprisonment for up to 7 years. However, the UK does recognise polygamous marriages if they took place in a country which permits it. Polygamy, or more specifically, polygyny, which is a man taking on more than one wife as opposed to a woman taking more than one husband, is traditionally permitted when the first wife permits of the second and the husband is able to treat his wives equally. Polygamy may offer short-term benefits to women in societies where women have generally low education levels and few economic opportunities, and where their status is linked to marriage and childbirth. However, a wider view, especially in Western societies, is that polygyny can only flourish in the context of gender inequality. But is it fair to pin gender inequality as the reason for polygamous marriages?
Anna, what kind of a woman is willing to share her husband?
Interestingly enough, the clients who call me say that they made the choice because it was a lifestyle choice. So it suited them at the time and they got the shock of their lives when it went wrong. So they're sometimes deliberately choosing a particular lifestyle over the single man-woman scenario.
Are they at a stage of their life where they're focusing on their careers? I mean, is there a particular age group?
It tends to be the younger women.
Okay.
Certainly the under 30s, it's becoming very popular in. Sadly, it seems to be those women who couldn't find the perfect bridegroom and they just felt rather than have another waiting period, let's just settle now for a husband who seems to be a good husband, and so he'll be a good husband to me as well. So it tends to happen on that basis. Sometimes it's just love affairs, where she would have been a mistress otherwise, so it's better to be married than a mistress. Sometimes it's, and in fact, the majority of the clients who phone me, it tends to be the first wife who phones me in distress at finding it.
In distress?
Yes, of course, that there's a second wife. So I must make it clear that the clients that I get, about a quarter of the inquiries for divorce are now in polygamous marriages, which is a shocking number for me because it's dramatically increased.
Well, why don't they just get divorced?
Well, number one, they may love him still, so they want me to do something to force the relationship to end. For example, not allow him to sponsor the second wife to the UK, and hopefully that will finish that marriage. As you know, there's a rise in agencies now that arrange marriages from women abroad, and that, therefore, is a very real concern for the British wife. Secondly, they may ask me to arrange a divorce when they are unregistered first wives. This is happening quite often. They have no legal rights whatsoever in the UK, and the second wife, because she's abroad, is the legal wife because there is no alternative to bring her into the UK except to marry her legally. So they're horrified to discover, maybe after 20 years of marriage, they have no legal rights, and the second wife immediately gains rights. Can you imagine the complexities that arise?
Well, we'll come on to women's rights in a bit, but just I wanted to touch on the question asked in the report. Is it fair to pin gender inequality for the reason for polygamous marriages?
It isn't if the women are deliberately choosing that lifestyle. How can you have a polygamous marriage without the women agreeing to it? I don't know of any one of these marriages in which they've been forced into it. So these are not forced marriages at all. They're all voluntary. So it begs the question, who are these women who are volunteering to be second, third and fourth wives? If that supply wasn't there, surely the demand would disappear. So it's not just a one-way process. We can't blame the men. The women are helping it happen.
I mean, is it true there are no love triangles in Islam?
Oh no, absolutely not true. They can be much more than triangles. They can be quadrilaterals and pentagons and whatever you want to call it, because human nature being what it is, finds marriage a struggle for sure. It's always going to be demanding. It takes a lot of give and take and compromise. Bad enough if it's just one man and one woman and one set of in-laws each. Just multiply that every time. And then the siblings, and the step-siblings, and then the grandparents. It becomes enormously complex. And it's really important to realize even our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not immune to this agonizing struggle that the wives have, who fell out in extraordinary ways, and it's well documented that he had to spend a month away from his wives just for respite.
But isn't it fair to say that if you enter into a polygamous marriage, one should treat all their wives equally?
It's not just fair, it's a mandatory command in the Quran. So if you see the root, that's what we have to go for. As a practicing Muslim, I have to look at the Quran as the basic guide for my life. And if I were going to enter into polygamy as a man, I would expect to follow the rules. And the rules are never told to us clearly. The Surah Nisa actually says very clearly, if you fear injustice to the orphan girls, then marry of those who please you 1, 2 or 3. But if you cannot do justice, it is better you marry one. That is essential if you realize that you cannot probably do justice in the way Islam demands of you, in time, in finance, in affection even. But the biggest gripe I've got is, where does that go, that first section, if you cannot do justice to the orphan girls? I want to ask the men that. Which orphan girls are they protecting by entering into these second, third and fourth marriages? It's a rare man who'll say, I married multiple wives because I was protecting their orphan daughters. I would like to meet that man.
I mean, how is polygamy viewed in the Muslim community itself?
Interestingly enough, up till 5 years ago, I would have said to you, it was rarer to find polygamy in a Muslim society than it is here in many countries of the world. For example, in Pakistan or India, it would be considered the worst thing you could do because culturally it is not acceptable. You just cannot take your second wife to the wedding or a party with your family and introduce her to everybody.
So is it more a cultural thing, for instance, like in Saudi Arabia?
Yes, so it's definitely
Tunisia,
cultural.
Outlawed.
Absolutely. So it's very much cultural, and it had been almost on the way out until about 5 years ago. But with the rise of fairly fundamentalist and extremist Islam, we're seeing again a resurgence. Rather than the good practice of Islam, which brings benefit to society, we're seeing an a la carte menu approach. Men taking what they want from Islam when it suits them, but not ever conducting their lives according to the obligations.
What about divorced, widowed, older women? Could polygamy be the answer for them?
And that's how the Quran laid it down. As you correctly said, it was unlimited polygamy before Islam was revealed 1400 years ago in Arabia. And there has never been a limit on it in any religion until then. So Islam was very radical in telling you to divorce any more than 4 wives and to concentrate ideally on only one. That was incredibly feminist at that time. With time, Islam and Sharia adapts to the geography it finds itself in, and different countries limit that even more. For example, Pakistan in 61 Ordinance Act said you must take the permission of the first wife. That had not been laid down before. Morocco has gone even further. So it can be limited with time. The whole ethos of it was that if you cannot do justice to the orphan girls, which means after a war, for example, where there's a decimation of the male population and you've only got one man to maybe 2 or 3 women, and those women fear prostitution when there's no welfare state, because that was the harsh reality for them, then a man would be asked, please, if you can financially support these women, would you marry the widow, the divorcee, look after their orphan girls, the children? And that was the ethos, a welfare state in action.
Yeah.
Now it appears to be, sadly, that none of that is being looked at. In fact, in the UK, I seem to be seeing a lot more gratification, physical gratification for the man,
Right.
but
Quick
no
fix.
financial benefit to the women, because a lot of them are on benefits and public and social housing.
Well,
That's
talk
not the
about-
Islamic model.
We'll talk about this a bit later. But joining us now is filmmaker Massoud Khan, whose work includes the documentary The Men with Many Wives, about British Muslims who practice polygamy in the UK. Massoud, what prompted you to make the documentary about polygamy in Britain?
I first was sort of interested in the stories of these women who I had read about, who were a little bit older. They were either divorced, but they were also convert women who were who had families from, you know, previous marriages, but then had converted and were interested in having a relationship, but didn't really want something full-time, if that makes sense. And so these women were quite happy to see someone, you know, maybe once or twice a week, and I was sort of interested in that, really. That's how the documentary originally came about. But then out of that, I was also really interested in the relationships between the wives, between, you know, how does a man maintain, you know, how do those relationships work? Can you love one more? Is it all right to love one wife more than another? That sort of thing. So it was really about exploring those human relationships, and I just got more and more involved, I guess. That's how. So that became more interesting.
Can they live with more than one wife? Were all the parties happy?
Yes, I mean, they obviously with one of the I suppose one of the conditions for people taking part in the documentary is that I really wanted to focus on people who were going into this with as consenting, fully understanding that there were no secret marriages, if you like. So there were people who were going into these polygamous marriages knowing that they were going into polygamous marriages. So, and for whatever reasons they were, most of them were making it work, and I sort of think that they knew what they were getting themselves in for. I think from what I saw was that the marriages were like any other marriages, perhaps. I mean, obviously,
But are normal marriages part-time marriages?
No, but that's a specific requirement, isn't it?
Yeah.
That wasn't like... I spoke to a lot of women outside who were also in monogamous relationships, thinking, actually, that sounds like a great idea. I know that it was only in probably tongue-in-cheek, but, you know, some sort of like that idea. I'm not saying that... all I'm saying is that I thought it, as long as people were getting into it with sort of knowing what they were getting into, I didn't really find anything problematic with that.
It was quite apparent in your documentary that extremely intelligent women were perfectly accepting of a polygamous setup. And what's your take on this?
Again, you know, it just comes down to if that's a lifestyle you want, then that's perfectly fine. I mean, I know plenty of people. Well, I don't know plenty, but I know of people who have had relationships, who have had affairs, who have had open relationships. You know, who they will have maybe 2 or 3, you know, guys who have 2 or 3 maybe girlfriends at one time. So I didn't really see it any differently from that, really.
Anna, Massoud mentioned women who've converted to Islam. Do these sort of women come to you as well?
Oh yes, I get a lot of what they call revert to Islam. But I wanted to ask Massoud, in his documentary there was a very negative aspect as well, which I was sad to see, where one wife didn't see her husband for 7 to 8 months at a time in Morocco. So surely that woman is taking the best of a situation and smiling through it, but it can't be a fair life with 3 children at the age of 26, hoping you'll come to Britain one day.
Absolutely. I mean, that was, yes, you're talking about the lady in Morocco.
Yes.
Who was sort of, yes, absolutely hoping. Yes, you know, when guys like, and we see that in places like Pakistan as well, where, you know, guys are going back and they're getting married to very young women, you know, and quite often parents are marrying them off because they want to escape all sorts of things, poverty, you know, and in the hope that they might actually one day end up in Pakistan, in England, obviously. Sorry. Yeah, there are some cases out there that are very quite traumatic, and I didn't come across any cases. I was didn't really get stats about.
We're losing you there. Well, I'll just go on to the next question. Sorry, Massoud. Out of the families you've spoken to, why didn't the women prefer to divorce and become independent? I think we've lost him there, but Anna, perhaps you could answer that.
I think when Massoud correctly said that if you have no choice at all in life, then a part-time husband is better than nothing. And I completely sympathize with that. We shouldn't be arrogant and think that everyone's going to be fortunate enough to find a good husband. That is a possibility. That many
How are
women
they good
say that.
on a financial level or on a companionship level? Because here we're saying there's this old adage, I'd rather be single than lonely. And some of these wives do seem quite lonely.
Yes, they are. Some of them are very lonely, and they would rather just take the chance of having children and never seeing their husband. So that's one option that they get out of it. The other one, like I say, they'd rather have their husband 1 or 2 days a week than none at all. So they make that decision. I seriously doubt, if you ask them deep down, if they could have a loving husband who cared for them and supported them every day of the week, would they really not want that? I wonder. I think they put the brave face on it, perhaps, but it's not an ideal situation. Otherwise, the Quran wouldn't have said it's better you marry one. I just do not think that Allah, and Allah knows us best, would have said it is better you have one person that you grow your love with.
Do you think it's actually possible to have a house full of women and not encounter jealousy and competition?
I suppose in a dream world it would be, but for how long is a question. It isn't natural to have even a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law sharing a house. Even a mother and a daughter fall out. Your best friend falls out if you live together all the time. So it's human nature not to get on. There's always little niggles. I've seen in some polygamous marriages, they make an enormous effort to overcompensate for that. Because instead of just reacting to your husband and saying how awful this is and stop treating me like that, there's always this fear that you could be discarded and he would stay with the other wife. So you're on your best behavior nearly all the time. I've seen that a lot. I don't like that.
So they're masking the truth.
I think a woman and a man need to be really open and transparent, and if you're not happy with each other, to grow by voicing that to each other. But all this subterfuge and hiding your feelings comes out somewhere.
It was quite interesting in the documentary how they would say they're very happy in their relationship, but they're getting a new wife. Or the husband said, well, it's my choice, I can have a new wife. But didn't quite get how you can move to, we're very happy, why take on a new wife?
Especially when, I keep saying this, yes, you're free to do many things in life, but can you stand before God on the Day of Judgment and say you did the right thing? And that's what Islam's about, living your life every day so that if you die today, you can feel that you've lived a life well. So these men have to ask themselves every single day, did I look after all my wives equally well? And did I treat them all with justice and all my children? It's very hard, even as I said, for our Prophet to have done that, because there were so many jealousies and so many petty squabbles going on between the wives. How is it possible in daily life with the stress we have in the West to make even one marriage work, with the financial struggles, with all those difficulties? Perhaps that's why I'm getting so much divorce coming to me as the head of the Islamic department. Maybe those marriages fail more quickly than other marriages, and that's why I'm seeing in 1 in 4 marriages that there's a polygamy issue. Could there be something in that?
How does a woman's education affect her choice? Do you find that it doesn't make a difference? This type of women that come to you, are they from a certain level of a background of higher education, lower education, or are they sort of
Traditionally, if a woman had everything going for her, education-wise, social status, good looks, etc., then she would not be compromising in any way. Let's be completely honest about that. We need to be a little bit realistic. It's where a woman's had to make compromises somewhere along the way. Either she's been divorced, and sadly our men are not looking kindly towards marrying a divorcee straight away, or she's got a child, or she's feeling she's on the shelf in her 30s, which is a tragic situation that women have to feel like that. But let's be realistic, that's what happens. Then they have to start compromising somewhere. And sometimes you've got PhDs and doctors and lawyers, people in government saying, do you know, I'd rather have one man 1 or 2 days a week than none at all. Somebody even said just to put up the shelves and help around the house. It just seems easier to get a handyman in.
Right. Well, now joining us over Skype is John in London, a spokesperson for Shazia Khan, CEO of secondwife.com, a matchmaking site for Muslim polygamists. John, what makes your company different to other dating agencies?
Well, part of our company is we are tailored directly towards people looking for polygamous marriages. So the internet is littered with so many different kinds of websites, and most of them you can just flick through thousands of profiles just at the flick of a finger. What we're trying to do is encourage people who are serious about their choice and wanting to be in the polygamous marriage and cater for that market directly.
Now, your main office is based in Dubai. How is polygamy viewed there?
Well, it is actually legal in Dubai to be in a polygamous marriage, and there's a lot of countries around the Middle East in general that are okay with polygamous marriages, and in Dubai it's not uncommon for some suitors to look for multiple wives before even marrying the first. And I've known of some situations where it's even been encouraged, especially if there's like some sort of financial help going on there. Like sometimes a woman might look at a man who thinks he's a good man, he's got good morals, he's got good financial backing, he's got a good career, he's looking after his wife, and she kind of wants a bit of that as well. And sometimes it can be good. Obviously, it's not the same in all countries. There's more countries where it is illegal than it is actually legal. So you've got to be careful where you are.
Right, I didn't know that. So who are your clientele? Men, women? What reasons do they give when they come to you?
Well, to be honest, when we started, we were a little bit nervous, thinking that we don't want to just have men who are sort of scooping up these women who are unfortunately divorced, maybe for whatever reason. And because, like you said, it's not nice that some women who may be in their 30s divorced, they shouldn't have that feeling where they're on the shelf. And we're thinking we don't want to just have these kind of people on the site. But what we found is that most of the women who sign up, they have the option, say in Islam, you can have a wali and you can be represented. Most of the females that sign up on our site have signed themselves up, and we've got a surprising ratio of about 65 to 35 between men and females signing up on the site. And it's international, so the United Kingdom is our 5th biggest user base at the minute.
Yeah, I'd like to know, what are the UK figures?
But altogether at the minute, we've been running for 5 months, and we've got 6,000 members on the site. of them 6,000 in the UK, we're touching close to 800 people, and we have the same kind of ratio between men and women, where we've got about 65% men and the rest female.
Wow, that's this. Wow. What do you think of that, Anna?
Shocking. I'm amazed.
Equal numbers.
I am personally also amazed. I'm amazed in a good way. I didn't think it would be that way. There was also recently a documentary on a UK TV channel regarding polygamous marriages in the UK.
Indeed, we spoke to the director just a few minutes ago. Yeah.
Well, they estimated that there's 20,000 polygamous marriages in the UK alone, just in the Muslim community.
There are apparently only 5 to 10% of Muslims.
Yeah,
so
well, in London,
that's not quite
in London. You've
as
got
large.
about 2 million Muslims, so it's still quite a lot.
Okay. I mean, one could argue that maybe your agency encourages adultery, almost normalizing it. How would you respond?
Well, if that does happen, then I would shut the website down tomorrow, because that is the exact opposite of what we want. In Western society, it's not uncommon for many marriages to break down because someone has been adulterous, and it's possible that a man has got maybe stuck in a rut, he's a little bit bored of his wife, and he goes out and finds another woman. But that woman is being used and abused, and she'll be cast aside the very next day or the next week when he's done with her. In this kind of setup, what we're encouraging is that you communicate with your wife. You've got to have a happy family dynamic in your family at the minute. So if you don't get the chance to just have a night off to sleep with another woman, it's not like that. You're committing to another lifelong relationship. So you're extending your family. You're not just going picking and choosing between different people, throwing that woman aside whenever you want. This is a lifelong commitment. It's not just affairs. It doesn't work like that.
But, yeah. I mean, do you think, Anna, these sort of sites are encouraging men who might not normally want to go into a polygamous marriage, be seduced by it, the ease of it all?
Certainly it is normalizing the situation, whereas in the past I would have said that a man would have thought long and hard about looking for a second wife. He would have maybe made more of an effort with the first wife, worked through the problems. Now it seems to be very much a knee-jerk reaction that if things are going wrong, it's bound to be better if I find a second wife. I've got young men that I know who are very intelligent but would immediately say, oh, well, I'm allowed to have a second, third or fourth, therefore I'm actually doing the right thing by looking immediately elsewhere if there's a problem. They don't seem to realize that that's an exception rather than the rule, and they should be working at their marriage. So I do feel the sites, and there are quite a few of them, there are massive events where, sadly, the Massoud Khan, who's attended as a producer of that documentary, has said they were like a meat market. That really is upsetting to know that people come knowing we will leave with a woman tonight. It's almost a given. So it's making it easier. Those men don't have to act at it. It's a click of a mouse and it's done. What's the reason for the demand amongst the women? Interestingly enough, I'd like to know how many are foreign and not UK British women. How many are making them available because of the possibility of a visa to Britain? I would really like to see that broken down, because in many of my cases, they're Central European, and it's almost become an industry. It's a commercial prospect.
John, I mean, how would you respond to that? Visas to get into the country?
Marriage is broken and something isn't working. I would strongly encourage that person to not go into a polygamous marriage. It's not for everyone, and it can be a very mentally demanding situation to be in. So if there is people out there encouraging polygamy, then that won't be us, and we'll be strongly against that.
Right.
As for women who are maybe seeking visas, then again, we do not want that, because they're going into it for the wrong reasons. So part of our site is we encourage you to seek people who are local to you. We don't want someone coming to the UK for whatever reason, or someone going to Dubai for another reason.
Have you done some figures and just seen how many are foreign registered?
Well, our site at the minute is internationally, so we've got people in almost most of the major countries around the world, and the people who talk between them, it would be hard to monitor. I'd have to really dig down on the stats for that. But as for if someone was in the UK and he was talking to someone in Morocco, for example, then we've got notices on our website where we say we encourage you to be local. It's difficult. It's difficult if you're married to someone on the other side of the country, never mind someone. And it's even more challenging if you have to move away from your family to be in this kind of dynamic. It's just, I don't think that's healthy. And we, as a company, do not promote that at all.
I mean, it states on your website that members can chat for as long as they want over the site's private messaging system, as long as the conversations don't take an Islamically inappropriate direction. What is meant by that?
Well, what we say is that there's so many sites out, and this comes back to the whole broken marriage thing, where if you're in a broken marriage, you might start looking elsewhere rather than fixing your own problems. What we're saying is that, no, we do not want that. We don't want people flirting. We don't want people talking over sexual nature or even exchanging personal images with each other. So we want to encourage genuine, healthy conversations. We've had conversations where the wife and the husband have been speaking to a potential second wife all together. So it's more about, imagine if this was a monogamous marriage website. We have the same sort of guidelines as if you were meeting for the first time.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, John, for joining us on the show today.
No problem. I've got a very interesting example where I've had women in the UK who have contacted me asking if I can build a system where they can seek for other women looking for their husband, which was one of the biggest shocks so far we've had.
I see.
But it does exist. And one woman contacted me saying that her mother is in a polygamous marriage, and she would like the same thing for herself just because she's enjoyed growing up in her family, and she kind of idolized it.
Great. Well,
so
that's very interesting.
There's a big demand from women, but it's not for everyone, and you've got to really want to be into this.
Great. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks.
One of the arguments on the secondwife.com website is that women are created in their nature to fight for a man, to fight to win him. And this is when her best comes out. So it keeps them on their toes and keeps their man happy. And this is actually on their website. What would you say to that?
I find that really demeaning of a woman, because that's nowhere in an Islamic ideal of a woman that she's fighting for a man. In fact, in Islam, the woman's status is so high that the man should be fighting for her. He fights to find the right woman for himself. He gives the meher, the financial commitment to marry her. She doesn't give any dowry to him. He is all the time trying to be the best man he can for her. In the Quran it says, he who amongst you is the best amongst you who is the best to his wife. So where does it say the wives are the best ones who are the best to their husbands? Isn't it interesting how Allah is actually telling you one thing and invariably men are making something else from that? I think women's status was so elevated by Islam, we've gone back to a pre-Islamic time, seriously.
Really?
We've gone back to the time when Islam needs to be revived again in the spirit it came. To elevate women from having to fight for men, to be who they are and to make men happy with who women really are.
It was quite interesting when he said sometimes he's approached by a wife and a husband, choosing another wife. So it kind of leads on to my next question about the hierarchy among wives. I mean, is the first wife more important in status than, say, the
She
second or
shouldn't
third?
be. She certainly should not be. You're not allowed to have any hierarchies, otherwise you're not doing justice to anybody, are you? So you're supposed to make sure nobody feels better than the other one. You're not allowed to compare them. The Islamic ideal, after it was first revealed, this verse, it was developed. Polygamy was developed and limitations were put even more on it, like financial equality, but then again giving them their own housing quarters. If you have to have more than one wife, each one to have their own bathroom and own bedroom, ideal her own kitchen, if not ideally her own house. So women should not be feeling in a hierarchy that the first wife gets everything and then the others share. That's certainly not what should be happening, no.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our next section now, considering the wider consequences of polygamy and whether the practice could be compatible within the British legal system. Anna, in 2010 to 11, Mufti Barakatullah stated that 43 out of the 700 applications to Leighton's Sharia Council cited polygamy as a reason for seeking divorce. I mean, how often do you find people citing polygamy as a reason for divorce in the sort of number of cases you see?
And that is just an illustration of why I'm saying I'm shocked at the dramatic increase. Only about 4 years ago, it was a drop in the ocean. And now, seriously, in about 1 in 4 cases of divorce, women are saying that they are worried about a polygamous marriage. It may be officially polygamous, as in abroad where it's allowed, but in most of the cases, it's unofficially polygamous, as in an unregistered nikah in the UK, so that the wife has no legal rights at all.
Can you just explain the word nikah?
Okay, so a nikah is the Islamic marriage ceremony. So that is what a lot of these wives are entering into. They have a nikah, so they feel in the eyes of God and the community, they are sanctioned to live with their husband and to have sexual relationships in a legal environment. However, that's not recognized by English law. And because it's not recognized, they have no rights whatsoever, even if they're living with or have children with who they think of as their husband. So that's why probably so many of these marriages are breaking down. Some of them are unknowingly walking into this trap, and some of them are lulled into a sense of security and finding out when it goes hideously wrong that there's no protection.
I was going to ask, I mean, currently in the UK, can our legal system protect the women if they find themselves in a situation where they are abandoned or they sort of didn't know? Nothing.
Not at all. And that's where non-Muslims are confused as well. It's not just a Muslim issue. Non-Muslims would also believe, if you went out on the street and did a poll now, that there is such a thing as a common law marriage, and that if you live together, you have rights. The same as if you're married or have children together. They seem to think that there's no need for a piece of paper, but the law is very clear. It never changed. You have to be legally married, i.e. registered here under the civil law, or married legally abroad, and for it to be recognized in the UK law. So if you're not, if you are one of the increasing majority, and I'm finding 80% plus of Muslims are not in that legal marriage, 80% plus, because they have entered into a nikah in their front room or in a hotel or a restaurant. Very few of them get married in a mosque. They've had that registration, they think, with a certificate, so it's all legal. They get the shock of their lives when they come to a lawyer like me who says, in fact, this is not recognized by the law, and you can be made homeless overnight, your children can be made homeless overnight, which is what's happening on a daily basis to me. It's agonizing to have to deal with those calls. I can put them right in many ways, and I can tell you about them later, how the law protects them, but the majority won't even get that far because they won't be wise enough to ask a solicitor who specializes in this. They'll give up and go on the benefits and state dependency.
You mentioned people forming illegal work visas to come here. Can you explain a bit more about what's happening there?
I'm very concerned in the last 2 years, certainly, in the increase in people telling me that they are finding that the wife is being sponsored over on a student visa or an illegal, i.e. fake work visa, where a fake job has been created for her to sponsor her in, and then she goes underground as a second or third wife. That's happening increasingly.
I've heard it's translation agencies, and
Yes.
they can't find anyone who might know that language or that specific thing, and there is a need to bring her into the country.
And this is why it's growing, because nobody quite knows how to get a handle on it. But I've had women ringing me up and saying they know 3 men in their own immediate family who in, for example, Bangladesh or India, Pakistan, have got very young second wives that they keep there without the first wife knowing, or have decided to bring them over in their old age to the UK as students. But then those wives have no rights. They stay indoors in a room constantly without knowing that they've got rights as a wife. There's also the other misery that I'm seeing a lot, men marrying women and abandoning them in countries overseas, the abandoned spouses. So they could marry them saying, Islamically, I'm allowed to marry a second one. It's actually bigamy because you're already legally married here, and that marriage abroad is legally a second marriage. So you could go to prison for up to 7 years. But because nobody bothers to report it, or certainly the police are not going to prosecute on it unless somebody is harmed, you've got second wives who are kept over there in the hope that they'll come over one day. And sometimes they're serving the parents as a servant almost for many, many years, and having children who are being taken care of by the maternal grandparents while the husband's here. It's extraordinary what's going on.
It's complicated.
Very complicated.
Okay, well, now joining us over Skype is Dr. Anna Piela, lecturer in religious studies at Leeds Trinity University. She has written about polygamy in her book, Muslim Women Online, Faith and Identity in Virtual Age, and also works with the Muslim Women's Council in Bradford. Dr. Piela, historically in the Middle East, what were the main reasons why polygamous marriages were set up?
Good evening. Historically, we have to remember the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula was incredibly diverse. There were several tribes, and those tribes also included Jewish tribes and Christian tribes. Polygamy seemed to be quite prevalent in all tribes pre-Islamically, and I think one of the main reasons for its prevalence was the fact that the more wives a man could marry, the more sons he could have, and that translated sort of straight into the power of the tribe. The tribe and the benefit of the tribe was of great concern for the tribe members. Secondly, marrying wives from outside of the tribe could help forge political alliances. So in that sense, there were a lot of social and economic and political reasons why polygamy was so prevalent.
And do you think there's been a shift in the reasons why people are choosing polygamy in modern-day Britain?
Well, obviously this is a completely different context. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women had no sort of legal subjectivity, so they were not treated as people. They could very rarely choose their own husbands. Only women of high status could do that. Obviously, in modern-day Britain, women, just as men, have legal subjectivity. But I think it is important here to sort of make a distinction between women who are tricked into polygamous marriages, as just described earlier. But we've got a growing group of women who actually choose to go into a polygamous marriage with sort of full awareness of its implications, shall we say. So I think currently, potentially the fact that we're still undergoing the economic crisis, that may mean that in communities, fewer men actually may be able to reach that sort of level of financial security to marry a wife. Therefore, we would have fewer men being able to marry women, but at the same time, quite a large group of women who might want to get married. And I think that is one thing that could encourage that, specifically, financial situation in many cases.
And through your research, how were women affected by polygamy? Can you tell us a bit about your findings?
So I identified three groups of women. The first group, whom I called traditionalists, I think they were affected by understandings of Islam that are coming from Saudi Arabia. And those women were unequivocally positive about polygamous marriage. They were quite clear that, well, in their view, men had the right to marry as many as 4 wives. And in their view, it was a sign of piety and love and obedience to God, not the man, to actually enter such a marriage. So they were quite positive about it, at least in theory, because to be honest, I didn't have many accounts, or I didn't encounter many narratives of women who were part to a polygamous marriage and had a negative experience. All the negative stories that I encountered came from children, the women who were children from polygamous marriages. The second group of women were women who said it was a choice, and as long as both, as long as there was consensus on both the man and woman's side, it was possible. But they also came up with this understanding of the Quran that perhaps it is not so clear that it is a right, because we've got one verse that says as long as a man can be fair to all his wives, he can marry up to 4. But there's another verse that says that it is impossible to be fair to more than one wife. So they actually choose to interpret this as a commandment that prevents men from marrying more than one wife. And then there were women who said actually both polygamy and monogamy are Islamically recommended because they're both sunnah, which means that they were both they both featured in the early Islamic history. The Prophet Muhammad had one wife in his earlier life, that was Khadija, but after her death he married several wives. So both monogamy and polygamy are treated by these women as fine. So some of the women, especially those that chose to enter a polygamous marriage, actually were quite happy with it. Interestingly, I found that sometimes first wives actually went online to find a second wife, and equally women who wanted to be a second wife would look for first wives online in order to arrange such a marriage, which is interesting because in that sense women basically took it into their own hands. The man was basically absent from these negotiations. So that was one interesting finding.
Absent, completely absent?
Well, it seemed so.
Yeah.
Because so,
it was
basically up to the first wife and the potential second wife to decide whether it would work. So
what was the first wife stating? His needs or her needs or their needs, or what?
Well, in this one particular case, it was actually quite heartbreaking because the woman said she had cancer. Therefore, she could not satisfy his sexual needs. Therefore, she felt that he had the right to enjoy his sexuality with another woman. And so she was looking for somebody. But I knew that following those discussions, she came back and she said actually that her husband refused to enter a polygamous marriage. He wanted to remain in a monogamous marriage with that first wife, with the only wife.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Anna Piela, for sharing your thoughts on this discussion today.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Anna, do you think polygamy in the UK is a way of rigging the benefits, more benefits through the system?
I don't want to be as harsh as that. I don't think anybody would say that people, in the way we used to argue, it's wrong to say teenage girls deliberately get pregnant to get a council flat. It's the same argument. I don't think that's a clear-cut view of the statistics. But it's certainly fair to say that it's an obligation on the Muslim husband to support his wife fully and his children fully. So he is not allowed to have any wife on benefits. It's supposed to be him looking for a job. Now, if he's unfortunate enough to have fallen on benefit, it's his duty to go back as a able-bodied man to work. That's the first obligation. So in my view, the Islamic narrative does not allow at all for him to have a lifestyle choice of polygamy, which is paid for by the taxpayer.
So
it
is
would be
this-
completely wrong.
Is there someone who monitors how much the man has financially and says, well, actually, no?
There is nobody. And
No.
that's why, sadly, those people who see it as a growing trend may have a point when they say these men could not have afforded it in Bangladesh or Morocco or anywhere else because there is no benefit system. They could not have had the luxury of the second wife. But here, not just second, but third or fourth are being married. I've had a case of one man who lost count and had 5 and then had to tell the congregation in a Birmingham mosque, will you forgive me, I forgot to divorce one, I have to divorce one. It's getting to a stage where it becomes ridiculous. And you make the situation a joke, which should not be happening
trivialize it.
with
Trivialize
Islam. Marriage is such a major commitment before God. You have to realize you have to look after women and children. So when you say, is the benefit system involved? Yes, sadly, it is facilitating it in many cases, and it shouldn't. In my book, it's not Islamically allowed.
What do you think about this statement, polygamy, an expression of religious conservatism or Muslim libertarianism? What's your take on that?
As a professor just said, the university lecturer, the first set of women who said it was a sign of piety to be polygamous. So they're actually thinking that they are pleasing God in much the same way they believe that by covering in a burqa, covering the whole body, they're pleasing God. So they're doing it to serve God. In the same way they think that by marrying into a polygamous marriage, they're pleasing God. I do think that these are very shallow interpretations of the rulings. If you look at the rulings and you really intellectually go into the chapter and verse of the Quran and Sunnah, you won't find it mandatory ever to cover your hair. It won't say that anywhere. It's a way you interpret every verse that's in the Quran. Now in the Quran Sharif, why is it more pious to be in a polygamous marriage? It's not saying that anywhere. It's not asking you to do that if your need is to be in a monogamous marriage. I think it's twisting everything on its head and making it suit what you want.
Is monogamy encouraged?
Yes, but that's in the Quran Sharif. Monogamy is the norm.
Yes.
And the Prophet, again, by his example, in pre-Islamic time, he was married to a woman 15 years older than him, Khadija, and was monogamous for 15 years. After Islam came, after the age of 40, yes, he had to enter into many alliances. Most of his wives were widows and divorcees, were not at all young and ostensibly not even attractive to many men. But he married them to make sure he gave the message that you should be able to look after those women as well. There was only one virgin amongst them, Hazrat Aisha, and one gift from the king of Egypt, Hazrat Maria. So these are, you can see, specific alliances because it would be a huge insult to turn away a gift from a very powerful neighbor. You can't all think you're in that position now, surely.
But you do have certain families still marrying other families and sort of making political alliances.
Yes, which is perfectly fine. So in Saudi Arabia, where that's the norm and that's the way they would like to do it and they can afford to look after their wives, and the wives are doing it out of their own free will, who are you and me to criticize that? I don't think we should do that. That's where the libertarian issue comes in. Because if it's not harming society, Islam allows it. It only bans something that harms society. And I'm always taking the Islamic view, which is you have no right to be judgmental of other people's lives. Let them be, as long as they're not harming the community. So it's not about individual needs, it's about the community. In the UK, if a man again is unable to just be happy with one wife, and he can justify to himself that he can financially, emotionally, and with equal time satisfy both wives and their children, I don't think we could criticize him. Why are we interfering with his life?
Well, joining us now over Skype is Shazia Hobbs, author of Gori's Daughter, a fictionalized account of growing up in a mixed-race polygamous family. Shazia, can you give us a brief overview of the type of household you grew up in?
I grew up in a house with a Pakistani mum and Pakistani dad, and my mum, who was white Catholic. Personally, for me, it was not a happy house. Two women sharing a man and their combined children is not going to work.
I mean, do you think the fact that your father's wives were not from the same religion impacted the situation?
Possibly, but I think that even if they were from the same religion, it wouldn't have been a happy home either.
I want to ask your opinion on the following argument, that polygamy is a reproductive strategy by which men increase the number of their offspring whilst decreasing the level of investment in each child. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. There was 12 children in our home, and three adults can't give 12 children the time and attention that they need.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I mean, how do you feel about your father? Could he share his resources, his time, his emotions equally? Did you feel
No.
shortchanged?
I did, yes, I personally did.
And how were you affected on an emotional level, for instance?
I felt like I was the odd one out in the family. I can't speak for my brothers and sisters. They may have felt differently. But personally, I did. I felt like there wasn't enough love and attention.
Were you the youngest?
No, I'm not the youngest.
No. Okay.
There's 4 younger than me.
Okay. Shazia, I think you're going to read an extract from your book. Could you do that?
Yes,
Thank
I can
you.
do, yes.
Okay.
Weddings are a huge celebration, and the build-up to the big day can last for several weeks. Families travel from all over the UK and even from Pakistan to witness the joyous occasion. Fatima's brother and family from Bradford, known as the Bradford Lot, came a week before the wedding and stayed with us in Albert Drive. He had 5 daughters and 2 sons. I believed Mummy and Fatima were both my mothers. All the younger children believed this to be true. We called them both Mother, Mummy for the white one and Ummi Ji for the Pakistani one. Therefore, they both were. We never questioned the fact that we had 2 mums. To us, it was normal. Which one of you are brothers and sisters? Asked one of the Bradford lot. We are all brothers and sisters, replied Imtiaz. Why are you being stupid? Who is your mum then? She asked. Mummy and Ummi Ji, he replied. You're the one who is stupid. You can only have one mum. Her sister laughed at him. The 7 of us all started shouting at the Bradford lot that they didn't know anything. Of course they did. Even when I insisted, my head and arms came from Mummy and my bottom half came from Ummi Ji. The other 6 agreed and gave their own versions of how we had 2 mums. It had to be true. Our parents had told us. That winter afternoon, all of us in Mummy's bedroom, we learned the truth. Imtiaz, Anwar and Kulsum, you are Ummi Ji's children and real brothers and sisters. And Jamal, Aisha, Amira and Yaqub, you are Mummy's children and real brothers and sisters, they told us. Fatima wasn't my real mum. I was thinking all day long about the way she treated us. Was it because she was our stepmother? It went over and over in my head, never giving me peace, until one day I would get why she hated us so passionately. Fatima had been forced to share a bath with Mummy, and that was the reason why Fatima hated us.
Thank you, Shazia. Daughter of Gori's daughter. That was a lovely reading. Thank you for your stories.
Thank you.
Anna, what support groups are there out there for women and children? Are there any?
For polygamous marriages particularly?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there is anything, and my clients certainly have no experience of being helped by any support group. It's just too new a phenomenon for a group to have been set up just for this. But I do see that there will be a need for specialist intervention for these cases. Certainly the women's groups that you'll speak to, Muslim women's groups, will all tell you, the same as I'm telling you, because I work with many of them, that there is a massive need for support, particularly for these vulnerable women. Sharia councils will back that up. that the divorce rate is very high amongst polygamous marriages, and so they come across this all the time. The divorce courts, if you were to ask them, would be increasingly worried about the tendency for a wife to mention unreasonable behavior in a petition. They might not call it adultery because they feel very bad as Muslim women accusing their husband of adultery. But they will call it, as my clients do, unreasonable behavior to take a second wife without making sure that the first wife was happy about it.
So do you envisage polygamy being legalised in the UK anytime soon?
Not at all. I can't see that that is something that has any popularity at all. It's still very much a minority view. Even amongst the Muslim community, it's really important to say this, because there's a view that just because the ones who are entering into polygamy are so vocal and so assertive about it, that it must be the norm. It's actually not the norm. It's a tiny minority. It's a growing minority because of all the reasons we've discussed today, but the vast majority of Muslims still aspire to a good, happy, monogamous marriage in which all the children are getting proper attention. And I thought that was heartbreaking to hear Shazia's story and how the children feel about this. The husband really should think of the needs of the children as well as his own needs. So in terms of legal support, they should know this. If anyone's watching who's in a polygamous relationship, I think we should explain that there are legal helplines here. For example, what I can do is for somebody who's not legally married and who has no roof over her head for her children, she can come to me and I can get her under the Children Act a sum of money from the husband to house the children. So it's really important to realize if you have a wealthy husband, he should give a property to house his children.
Right.
And the English law supports her in that. In the same way, any illegitimate children would be supported. Mm. So that's what happens there. Secondly, the Child Support Agency will give you maintenance even if you're not married. That's really important to realize that, and that you can apply. Because I was really shocked to find last Friday a woman said to me, a young British woman who said to me, I don't want anything from him now that he's discarded me. I just want my meher, that's all I want, the Islamic settlement. She was a very observant Muslim, and she felt as a British-born and bred Muslim, all she was entitled to was her Islamic rights, and believe me, she didn't even know she was legally married. She thought the Islamic marriage mattered and nothing else, because that's what she was told. I had a real job convincing her the marriage certificate was a legally registered English marriage certificate, and she has a right not to be on benefits and to be begging her father for support when the husband has 3 homes. He can give her 1 home. Yeah. So can you imagine the level of ignorance that's out there? People really need to realize Muslim women have a duty to know their own rights under Islam and in the country they live in. They mustn't be a burden to anybody.
Well, thank you, Anna. That's great advice. Thank you. Well, as we have heard today, polygamy is fraught with complexities on all levels. On the face of it, why shouldn't consenting adults engage in a polygamous setup, providing the situation isn't abused and all parties are happy? But how achievable is this ideal? Women, children, and even men to a certain degree don't always benefit from this arrangement, and there are considerable repercussions, whether it be emotional, legal, or financial. At the end of the day, can we see polygamy being legalised in the UK? Perhaps not anytime soon, but if this is a trend on the rise in the Muslim community here, then it is not one we can ignore, and support groups should be in place to protect the vulnerable in this sort of framework. I'd like to thank all my guests on today's show, Massoud Khan, John for secondwife.com, Dr. Anna Piella, Shazia Hobbs, and of course Anna Khan with me in the studio. Until next time, goodbye.